Welcome to Karma Chronicles. Please like the video and subscribe. Let's begin.
I pulled into the driveway, the weight of the wrapped gift in my hand heavier than I expected. It was a vintage camera, something I'd found online, an old model my father had once used. I thought it would be a nice way to bridge the gap between us, a piece of his past he might appreciate. The door opened before I could knock. My father stood in the frame, dressed in his usual crisp suit, eyes scanning me with that practiced detachment. I was still in uniform, though it felt like a second skin now. "Don't come home for Christmas this year," he said flatly, his voice barely lifting. "I can't explain to everyone why my daughter became a cop." I froze. The words hit harder than I expected, even though I knew it was coming. His gaze didn't soften, not even a hint of recognition or warmth. I didn't know what to say. What was there to say? I just stood there holding the camera, the weight of it now feeling ridiculous in my hand. "Dad," I started, but my voice trailed off. I had nothing else. He didn't wait for me to respond. He turned back into the house without a second glance, the door shutting behind him with a thud that echoed in my chest. I didn't even know if I was angry. It wasn't surprising. But still, I could feel the sting creeping in. My father had always been distant, an emotional vacuum. But this was colder than usual. It was rejection, pure and simple. I could feel it spreading inside me, turning my stomach. I turned and walked back to my car, the camera still clutched in my hand. The drive back to my apartment was silent. Beth, my driver, glanced over at me when she pulled away from the curb. "You okay?" she asked, her voice light, like she didn't expect an answer. "I'm fine," I said. I wasn't fine. But I didn't have the energy for a conversation about it. Beth didn't push. She just focused on the road, and I stared out the window. I wasn't going to cry over this, not yet anyway. I had known deep down for years that my father would never see me as enough. Not the way he wanted a son to be, not the way he wanted to show off his legacy. I was just a placeholder, a daughter. Maybe it was time I stopped trying to meet his expectations. He had made it clear, after all. And for the first time, something in me shifted. This was his problem, not mine. He could stay angry, stay disappointed. I wasn't going to break myself trying to fix it anymore. The next day felt like any other. I went through the motions, checking in with Rick about our caseload, dealing with a petty theft report, a domestic dispute, and a noise complaint. Nothing big. I was just another cop doing the job. But everything felt muted, like I was walking around in a fog, everything blurry around the edges. The steady hum of the precinct felt distant somehow, like I wasn't really there. I tried to shake it off, focused on the reports, on Rick's sarcastic commentary about the latest case, but it wasn't working. My mind kept drifting back to my father's words, to the way he dismissed me at the door, like I was nothing more than a nuisance. I grabbed coffee in the break room, hoping the bitter taste would ground me. Sarah, one of the newer officers, was sitting at the table with her phone in hand, scrolling. She looked up when I walked in, eyes wide like she'd been waiting for me to show up. "Hey, Julia," she said, her tone a little too casual. "You see your dad's Facebook post?" My stomach twisted. "What about it?" Sarah held up her phone, showing me the screen. A post with a picture of my father standing in front of his studio, arms crossed, his usual smug expression. The caption was cryptic, but cutting. "Daughters are supposed to be teachers, not warriors." My chest tightened. It was bad enough he'd rejected me in person. Now he was airing it all out for the world to see. The comments were piling up. Some were sympathetic, but most were mocking. I could feel the heat crawling up my neck. "Jesus," I muttered. I stared at the screen, suddenly aware of how everyone else in the room was watching me. Sarah didn't say anything, just set her phone down and went back to her coffee. The words echoed in my head as I left the break room. Teachers, not warriors. Like I was some failed experiment, like my whole life was a mistake. By the time I made it back to my desk, my phone was vibrating nonstop. Calls, voicemails, messages, all from family. I swallowed hard, staring at my father's name at the top of the list. I clicked on the first voicemail. "Julia, this is your father. You need to explain yourself. This isn't how things are done in our family. I don't understand why you'd—" His voice cracked, filled with that familiar anger. "This is not how you were raised." The voicemail ended abruptly. My hand trembled, but I didn't hesitate. I deleted it. No point in listening to that kind of shit anymore. It was always the same with him. Anger, disappointment, blame. I wasn't the one who needed to explain anything. I shoved the phone into my bag, trying to shake the feeling of being trapped in a box. There was no escaping this. Then, as if things weren't bad enough, a new message popped up on my phone. A video. I clicked on it, my stomach sinking even further. It was a short clip, taken from the side of the porch at my father's house. You could see me standing there in my uniform, shifting uncomfortably while my father stood rigid, his face impassive. I looked awkward, out of place. And I was. The video zoomed in on my father as he turned away, the door slamming shut behind him. It had been filmed by someone standing off to the side, capturing that exact moment. The exact moment he rejected me. The video was already going viral, the comments flooding in. "She deserves better than that," one said. "Don't let him make you feel small," another read. I didn't respond. I didn't have to. The world could see what he'd done. They didn't need me to explain it. The next few hours dragged by, each minute feeling like a year. My mind kept circling back to the same thoughts, but I didn't let them control me. I pushed through. I talked to Rick about the new case, listened to Sarah's gossip, and worked through paperwork like I was just another officer, nothing more, nothing less. But the video kept replaying in my head. My father's rejection. The way he made me feel invisible, like nothing I'd ever done in my life was good enough. I wasn't surprised, but I was still devastated. The sting of it was just as sharp as the first time he'd let me down. And now, the whole world was watching. I sat at my desk, scrolling through the flood of comments on the video. It felt like a punch in the gut each time my eyes landed on another stranger's opinion. Some were supportive, others mocking. A few even said I should confront my father. Don't let him treat you like that. The irony was that I had no intention of confronting him ever again. I was still scrolling when my phone buzzed. A local news reporter's name flashed on the screen. I knew what they wanted. Another story, another opportunity for the world to weigh in. I didn't even think twice before hitting decline. But they didn't give up. The voicemail popped up seconds later. It was the reporter asking for an interview. "Julia, we'd love to hear your side of the story. A lot of people are talking about the video. We think it could really resonate with our viewers." She sounded like she thought I'd be flattered. I deleted it. I wasn't doing this for anyone else. The phone buzzed again. This time, it was my father's name flashing on the screen. I almost ignored it, but I couldn't quite bring myself to do that. I answered. "Julia, it's your father. You need to take that video down. This is getting out of hand. You're embarrassing me. You need to fix this." His voice was tight, urgent, like he thought he could still control the situation, like I owed him something. I pressed the button to end the call before he could say anything else. The next notification that popped up was from a veterans group. They were asking me to speak at an event on overcoming family rejection and finding strength. It felt like some kind of cruel joke. I stared at the message for a moment. Part of me wanted to tell them to fuck off, but another part of me saw the opportunity to take control of my own story, even if it felt like an unwanted spotlight. I ignored the impulse to respond and instead went to my settings, blocking my father's number. There was no point in entertaining his voice anymore. The silence was louder than any explanation I could give. That evening, I sat alone in my small apartment, the weight of everything pressing down. I tried to distract myself by researching something else. My father's business dealings. I didn't know why, but it felt important. I pulled up old articles and financial reports. The deeper I dug, the clearer it became how tangled my life had been with his. His name had been on so many of my financial documents. Mortgages, investments, loans. He'd never asked for help, never thanked me for it. But I had been there, in the background, picking up pieces for years. I should have felt betrayed. But mostly, I just felt tired. I knew what kind of man my father was, and I'd never really admitted how much I'd done to keep him afloat. Always under the surface, always in the shadows. It was like he'd created this system of dependency, and I'd just fallen in line without ever thinking to question it. The next morning, I checked my bank account on autopilot, the way I did every morning. But today there was something different. My heart dropped when I saw the recurring payment. For the last 5 years, I'd been automatically sending money to cover his mortgage. I hadn't even noticed it. Every month, a chunk of my paycheck had gone to him. Without question, without acknowledgement. It wasn't a huge amount, but it was significant. It had been happening for so long that I hadn't even thought about it anymore. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen, the realization slowly sinking in. This was it. This was the last thread. I'd been funding his life. Quietly, without fanfare. I hadn't even known how much power I had given him. And now, I was done. I had nothing left to give. It felt like the last connection to him, one final invisible thread. I made the decision right then to cancel it, to stop. Let him drown in the consequences of his choices. It wasn't about the money. It was about cutting the cord. I moved to the payment page, my fingers hovering over the screen. For a moment, I hesitated, but I knew if I didn't do it now, I'd keep postponing it. I hit cancel. The payment was gone. The connection severed. I was free. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like relief. I sat there for a minute, staring at the screen after canceling the payment. It was done. No more payments to my father, no more quietly propping him up financially. For years, I'd never questioned it. I just did it. Paid for house repairs when his business fell apart. Covered legal fees when his poor decisions caught up with him. Never once did I get a thank you, a word of acknowledgement. It was like I didn't exist in those moments. Just a means to an end. It had become automatic, like breathing. But now, with the payment gone, it felt like I'd finally made a clean break. The weight had lifted. It was empowering. The kind of power I hadn't realized I'd been withholding from myself for so long. The phone rang. I glanced at the screen. Blocked number. I didn't pick up. The phone rang again, and again, and again. The calls didn't stop for hours, but I held firm. Every buzz, every vibration felt like a jab, but I ignored it. I knew what he wanted, I knew the routine. He'd be angry, demanding, asking me to fix the mess I'd supposedly caused. But I wasn't playing this game anymore. The next morning, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Sophie, my half-sister. I hadn't spoken to her in a couple of weeks, but I wasn't surprised to hear from her now. Hey, Jules, just wanted to let you know that Dad's losing it. He's freaking out about his finances, says he's in trouble without your help. You know how he is. Sophie's message was half concerned, half amused, like she was watching a show she couldn't look away from. I couldn't help but smile, a little relieved by the irony of it all. He was finally feeling the consequences of his choices. Good, let him sit in it. I didn't respond to Sophie right away. Instead, I spent the afternoon at my apartment, sorting through everything. I pulled out old bank statements, receipts, records of every check I'd written, every wire transfer I'd made over the years. I'd never kept track of it before, never thought about how much I'd given until I saw it all laid out in front of me. The total amount didn't matter. It wasn't the money that stung. It was the realization of how many times I'd quietly helped him, how many times I'd sacrificed my own well-being, and how he'd never once acknowledged it. I created a detailed list. Every favor, every loan, the money for the repairs on the house after the flood, the legal fees when he got tangled up in another lawsuit. I wrote it all down, the way I should have done years ago. I wasn't doing this for any reason other than to remind myself, to remember that I had been there for him and he'd never been there for me. Not really. The weight of it all felt like a final severance, like I was cutting through a thread that had bound me to him for too long. The phone buzzed again. I glanced at the screen. Another blocked number. This time, I didn't even think about it. I hit decline without hesitation, almost like I was doing it out of habit. A habit I was breaking, slowly but surely. The calls kept coming, but I didn't care. Each ring felt farther away, like his voice was becoming something I no longer had to hear. I looked at the list again. A strange calm settled over me, a sense of closure. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about punishing him. It was about me finally realizing I didn't owe him anything. Not anymore. The idea that I could cut myself loose, that I could finally stop letting him pull my strings, felt like a weight being lifted off my chest. It was over, and I was free. I spent the next couple of days gathering everything. Bank statements, mortgage payments, receipts, every document that proved just how intertwined my life had been with his. Each one told a story of years spent picking up the pieces of his failures, never asking for anything in return. And now, those pieces were coming back to him, all wrapped up in neat little packages. I couldn't make sense of why I hadn't done this sooner. Maybe I thought it would make me seem petty or vindictive. But it wasn't about him anymore. It wasn't about getting even. This was about owning my story, making it clear to everyone, including myself, that I'd been holding up a facade for years. That my father wasn't just distant, he was actively trying to tear me down. I didn't care about what people thought anymore. I stuffed the packages into envelopes, each one carefully sealed. They weren't just for his business partners. They were for the people who had witnessed my father's carefully constructed image and never questioned it. The ones who'd bought into his version of who I was. They needed to see the truth. When the packages were ready, I sent them off. I knew exactly where they'd end up. A dinner event, a gathering of my father's business partners, family friends, and anyone who cared enough to show up. I didn't wait long. The next evening, I saw it all unfold. The event was held at one of those fancy banquet halls. the kind of place where everything was polished and perfect, and the air smelled of expensive wine and perfumed air. I showed up casually, like I had no real reason to be there, though I knew what was coming. I stood back, out of the way, watching as the guests began flipping through the documents, their faces first polite, then stunned. Whispers started. Not the usual polite chatter you'd expect at these events. This was different. It was real. People were talking now, and they weren't just talking about the dinner. I spotted my father at the center of the room, his face turning redder by the second as the documents were passed around. I could hear snippets of conversations. What is this? What does this mean? Why is Julia's name all over this? I could see him trying to regain control of the room, trying to explain it away, but his words stumbled. The damage had been done. And then I saw Mark, my cousin, the golden boy of the family, the one who always did everything right. He had his hand raised, holding the documents in front of him. Mark wasn't the confrontational type, but when he spoke, people listened. He cleared his throat, his voice cutting through the room. "This is gaslighting, not drama," he said, looking straight at my father. "You've been using Julia. This is some serious manipulation. You can't just play the victim every time someone calls you out." The room went quiet. I felt the air shift. People started looking at each other, trying to figure out how to navigate this new, uncomfortable reality. My father stood there, his jaw clenched, his eyes darting around the room like he was waiting for someone to come to his defense. But no one did. Not this time. By the time dessert was served, most of the guests had already filtered out. Some were still milling about, but the crowd had thinned. The whispers had died down, leaving a heavy silence in their wake. I knew what had happened. My father's pride was broken. He was alone now, the light catching the sweat on his forehead, his suit suddenly too tight, his posture slumped. I could see it in his eyes. The people who had once stood by him were now walking away, not just physically, but emotionally. He had no one to lean on. He'd been exposed, and there was no escaping it now. I stayed a while longer, watching from a distance. It felt strange, not being part of the drama for once. I had always been the one in the background, fixing things, smoothing things over, trying to keep up appearances. But now it wasn't my problem anymore. As the last few guests trickled out, I knew it was over. My father's world was crumbling around him, and I didn't have to be the one to fix it this time. The silence spoke louder than anything I could have said. The next few days were a blur of notifications, but I didn't bother responding to any of them. Family members, some disappointed, others surprisingly supportive, left messages. My phone buzzed constantly, but I didn't pick it up. I didn't need to hear the same tired opinions from people who never truly understood. They didn't get it. Not one of them had to sit across from my father, take his cold rejection, and watch him pull away, pretending I didn't exist. His calls didn't stop. Every time I looked at my phone, there he was, blocked number after blocked number. I'd been avoiding him for days now, and it wasn't out of anger. It was just necessary. For once, I didn't need to explain myself to him. Not anymore. On Christmas Eve, I came home after a long shift. I was exhausted. As I walked in, I saw the letter. It was thick, the handwriting on the envelope immediately recognizable, my father's scrawl, as perfect and composed as always. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. The fact that it was even a letter told me everything I needed to know. A letter was his way of trying to regain control, trying to make it seem like he was still in charge of the narrative. He wouldn't apologize. He never had. This would be some vague attempt to defend himself, to shift the blame back on me. I wasn't interested. I tossed the letter onto the kitchen table and turned away, but before I could shake off the feeling of it, my phone buzzed again. "Sophie, I heard from Dad," she said, her voice tired. "He hasn't left the house in days. He's just reading those documents over and over again. I don't think he knows what to do with himself." I leaned against the counter, running my hand through my hair. It wasn't satisfying, the image of him holed up, stewing in his guilt. But there was something unsettling about it too. I realized then that for the first time, my father was seeing the truth. He was confronting it, even if he wasn't admitting it. The weight of what he'd done, all the lies, the manipulation, it was finally breaking through his carefully built walls. And that was something I hadn't expected. "Well," I said quietly, "he'll figure it out." Sophie didn't respond at first, like she wasn't sure if she should say more. Finally, she exhaled. "I guess so, but he's not handling it well." "Good," I said. "Let him sit with it." I ended the call soon after, not because I was angry, but because there was nothing left to say. Sophie would understand. My father had always been the person who could never admit when he was wrong. Now the consequences were his to deal with. That afternoon, while I was trying to focus on something, anything to drown out the noise, my phone rang again. It was from a former colleague, someone I'd worked with back in my early days on the force. I hesitated for a second, but answered. Julia, the voice on the other end said, this is Rachel. We're putting together a panel for a police event, talking about overcoming personal struggles and balancing family and duty. We'd love for you to speak about your experiences, if you're interested. I paused. It felt like the kind of invitation I'd always brushed off. Public speaking wasn't my thing. But something about it felt right this time, like it was an opportunity to take control of the narrative. Not for anyone else's approval, but for me, for my own strength. I'm in, I said, surprising myself. I'll do it. We wrapped up the details, and I hung up the phone, feeling an odd sense of purpose settle in. It wasn't the kind of attention I'd ever sought, but maybe it was exactly what I needed now. A chance to share my side of the story on my terms. And for once, I wouldn't be hiding in the shadows. I wouldn't be trying to prove myself to my father or anyone else. I was doing this for me. The phone buzzed again, but I didn't check it. I didn't need to. There was nothing left to say to anyone else. Not right now. Not when I was finally figuring out who I was without him, without all the baggage he'd left me to carry. The event was held at a small auditorium, filled with faces that were a mix of curious and supportive. There was a palpable energy in the air, one that made me feel more exposed than I expected. I'd agreed to speak, but now that I was standing behind the podium, a wave of doubt hit me, but I pushed it down. This was mine to own. I cleared my throat. I never thought I'd be here, I began, the words coming out rough, but steady. I spent years trying to make my father proud, trying to meet his expectations. But somewhere along the way, I realized something. His approval was a weight I didn't need to carry anymore. I looked out at the crowd, their eyes on me, some with nods of understanding. I felt the sting of rejection again, but it wasn't the same as before. Now it was just another part of my story, not something I was letting define me. I became a cop, not because I wanted to prove something to him, but because it was what I wanted. I wanted to help people. I wanted to make a difference. But for years, my father told me that wasn't enough. That I should have been something else, something he could be proud of. I paused, letting the silence sit for a moment. It felt like something inside me was finally breaking free, like the chains had loosened. I had to learn that my worth isn't tied to anyone else's expectations. Not my father's, not anyone else's. I had to learn to own my story, even if it meant walking away from what I thought was family. There was a ripple of recognition in the crowd, some people nodding, others holding their breath. I didn't need their applause. I just needed them to hear me. When I finished, there was silence for a beat before the applause came. It wasn't overwhelming, but it was real, genuine. Several veterans came up afterward, shaking my hand, thanking me for my honesty, for sharing something so raw. It was a quiet, respectful acknowledgement, but it felt like more than I'd ever gotten from my father. One of the attendees, an older man, handed me a framed quote before he left. I looked down at it. It read, "Your strength doesn't come from the validation of others, but from knowing who you are, regardless of their approval." It hit me in the chest. I stared at it for a long moment before slipping it into my bag. It was a reminder I would keep with me, the kind of reminder I'd been needing for a long time. I stepped outside after the event. The night air was cold, sharp against my skin, but it felt good. Like I was shedding something heavy, something I'd been carrying for years. I walked away from the crowd to a quiet corner of the lot and just stood there for a few minutes, taking it all in. I realized then that I wasn't looking for my father's approval anymore, not in the way I used to. For the first time, I didn't need him to tell me I was worth something. I had learned to be enough on my own. Later that evening, I called Sophie again. Her voice was soft on the other end. "Hey, Jules, I just wanted to let you know, Dad's talking about selling the house. He's thinking of retreating from everything, stepping out of the public eye. He's pretty shaken up." I stood there, leaning against the cool brick of the building, staring out into the dark. "Yeah," I said after a long pause. "It's his decision now. I'm done trying to fix it." Sophie didn't respond right away. I didn't expect her to. She knew. She understood. I could hear the sigh in her voice when she spoke next. "All right, take care of yourself, okay?" "I will," I said. "You too." I hung up, feeling like I had finally closed a door I'd been holding open for too long. It wasn't about him anymore. It hadn't been for a while. And as I stood there, in the stillness of the night, I realized that for the first time in my life, I was free. A few days after the event, I came home to find a letter waiting for me. It was thick, familiar handwriting on the envelope. My father's scrawl. My heart didn't race this time. There was no anticipation, no dread, just a small, flat feeling that I couldn't place. I opened it and unfolded the single sheet of paper. There was no apology, no grand explanation. His words were brief, but they hit harder than I expected. I never saw you as capable of holding things together, Julia, but you always were. You've always been the one making things work behind the scenes. I've never told you that before, and I'm not sure I'll ever get the chance again. I read the letter twice, then once more for good measure. That was it. There was nothing else. No plea for reconciliation, no attempt to explain his actions, no invitation for us to talk. Just the truth, stripped down to the basics. I felt nothing. Not anger, not satisfaction, not relief. Just quiet. For a second, I wondered why he'd sent it, what he hoped it would achieve. Maybe he thought it would make up for everything that had happened between us. Or maybe he thought I needed to hear it. But the truth was, I had already accepted it. Probably before he did. I set the letter down, my fingers lingering on the paper, and walked over to the drawer where I kept the other mementos from my past. A few old pictures, a few pieces of jewelry from my mother, things I had held onto out of some misguided sense of attachment. I slipped the letter in with the others, not making a big deal of it. Just another scrap of my history, tucked away where it belonged. I didn't slam the drawer shut. I didn't feel the need to be dramatic about it. I closed it quietly, deliberately. The silence that had lingered between us, hanging like a heavy fog, felt different now. It wasn't a void anymore. It wasn't an unresolved ache. It was just gone. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for anything from him. Not his approval, not his validation, not his love. The weight of his expectations, those impossible, suffocating expectations, no longer had the power to drag me down. I had no interest in playing the role he had written for me. I could hear the muffled hum of the city outside, but in my apartment, everything was still. The only sound was my own breathing, steady, unhurried. I wasn't holding my breath anymore. I wasn't waiting for the storm to pass. It had passed. It was over. I walked into the kitchen and poured myself a drink, letting the warmth settle in my chest. The letter wasn't a turning point. It wasn't a breakthrough. It was just another reminder that I had already let go, that the person I had spent my life trying to please was no longer my problem. And that was a freedom I couldn't ignore. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even sad. I just understood. It was his time to face the truth, just like it had always been mine. But I didn't need to share that burden with him anymore. The silence, once a weight, now felt like a release. It was space to breathe, to be myself, to stop pretending I could fix something that was never mine to fix. And for the first time, I felt the full weight of the one truth that mattered. I was free. I walked back to my apartment that evening, the city buzzing around me. But everything felt quieter than usual. My small place, simple and unpretentious, felt more like home than it ever had. There was a sense of ease in the space now, like it reflected who I was, not who I had tried to be for so long. I had stopped pretending, and for the first time in a long while, I wasn't carrying anyone else's expectations. I tossed my keys onto the counter and kicked off my boots, feeling the pull of comfort. It had been a long day, a long few months really, but I wasn't drained. I wasn't waiting for anything. There was a calm in me now that I'd never known. My phone buzzed on the counter. I picked it up, expecting another call or text from Sophie. Sure enough, it was her. "Dad sold the house," she wrote. "No mention of you. Just wanted to let you know." I stared at the screen for a few moments. There was a strange weight in the message, but no anger in me anymore, no desire to react. I smiled softly, almost absent-mindedly. That was it. He was done, and I was done with him. The house was just another part of his life that no longer mattered to me. I'd spent so much of mine trying to be a part of it, trying to be someone he could respect, someone he could love. But none of it ever worked. I had to learn to stop needing him to say it. I leaned back against the counter, my phone still in hand, and looked out the window. The city lights stretched out before me, a constant hum that felt more like a heartbeat than anything else. It was far from perfect, but it was mine. The chaos of everything, my life, my choices, was in motion. But I felt a stillness in me I hadn't known before. I could see everything so clearly now. I had finally let go. The tension I didn't even realize I'd been carrying dissolved. No more wondering if he'd ever be proud. No more trying to fill a hole that was never going to be filled. I didn't need his approval, his love. I had my own. For the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. There was no noise in my head anymore, no self-doubt or second-guessing. It was just me, standing here, watching the city, breathing in the quiet after so much noise. And it was enough. I was enough. The weight I had been carrying for years finally slipped away, and I was free.